Hello and welcome to another episode of Rugby Through the Leagues podcast. This week we are going to South America. Not physically, unfortunately, but through the powers of Zoom and the internet. We are joined by Joe Santamaria, who is based in Buenos Aires at the minute. We've managed to get the time zones working, Joe, and I really appreciate your time. It's taken us a little while to tie this together. We are going to be talking about Super Rugby Americas, potentially the best league that people don't know about in the world currently. Is that a fair comment?
Well, I've got a vested interest, but yeah, I'd certainly say so. It's the best league you've never heard of. Well, thanks for having me on, Carl. Yeah, we're about to chat Super Rugby America. It's going to be fantastic. There's not many English-speaking people having this conversation, which is a shame. Hopefully there'll be more because it's an unbelievable league. So for anyone who doesn't know, clue in the name, clue in me being in Buenos Aires. This is a franchise tournament based out of South America. It's now going into its 6th year, launched in 2020. Terrible time to launch an international sports league. It only got a couple of games in before it was cancelled, but it's survived and it's actually thriving. It's in a really, really good spot at the moment. We'll get into the details of the trials and tribulations, the players, the coaches. Listeners might be surprised by how many names come up that they might already know because they might already be playing for their clubs in Europe. But it feels as though the league is just on the cusp of really kind of breaking into the rugby consciousness in Europe and beyond, because the players are already going over, the quality is improving every year, and it's a fantastic spectacle. So I'm really looking forward to chatting it over for the next however long this lasts.
And we are literally on the cusp of a new season as well. So this is why we've timed this ready for this. We are literally just coming towards the end of January. So we're a few weeks ahead of the new season. A few games are coming up, friendlies, teams are sort of testing them. They're all in camp now. What is your quick reaction to how this new season's going to explode onto the scene?
Yeah, I think first thing to mention is there's a new franchise for the first time. So Argentina have now got a 4th team, the Capybaras. And yes, that is, for anyone who's surprised to see that, that is the adorable animal, although it'll be less adorable when it's, being worn on the jersey of 15 bloodthirsty Argentines. Yeah. So the league's expanded to 8 teams now. So obviously year-on-year growth, and the quality on the pitch is also improving. So, I can't wait for it. Honestly, last season was one of the most pleasurable experiences I've had covering the league professionally, but also just as a fan following a league of rugby in a very, very long time. Anyone who hasn't gone back and checked out last season, you can go and see the highlights from all the rounds, including the latter rounds in particular. The final was won by the Uruguayan franchise Penarol. They won 35-34. And Dogos, their opponents, their Argentine opponents, almost came back from kind of 20, 25 points down.
Left it dead late,
if that game was 2 minutes longer, the Dogos would have been champions. Yeah. I was at that game live. It was unbelievable. Wow. Not only as a spectacle, but also just the quality of the rugby, and we'll talk. But a load of those guys on the Dogos side, the losing side, got straight on a plane, and a load of them were playing against the Lions for Argentina just a couple of weeks later. Yeah. So the quality of the league is improving every year. The kind of growth of the infrastructure of the league really feels this season as though it's growing. I'm based in Buenos Aires, as you mentioned, so the local team here is Pampas. I've definitely seen more Pampas jerseys out and about than I did this time a year ago. The clubs are releasing their memberships, and it looks like shirt sales are up. Attendances are likely to be up as they were last year compared to 2024. So kind of on all levels, the league feels as though it's ready to take a next step forwards, and maybe we'll get into the storylines to come. But I cannot wait. As you mentioned, it kicks off, I think, February the 20th is the first round.
Yep.
And
Friday night. Yeah. Friday the 20th.
It's going to be an unbelievable year.
Yeah, I can't wait. Obviously, as you mentioned, a few of the players jumped on that plane from that final or from their other games as well. Obviously, Paraguay they got their own side in there. They had to go off to play in the American Nations Cup and the qualifiers and all the World Cup qualifiers that they had subsequently. So a lot of these players are fully blooded international sides. Some of the Argentinians haven't come back though, because they've stayed in England or stayed on their continent. Many have gone across to the Super Rugby over down in
the other Super Rugby.
Haven't they? The other Super, the rubbish one, yeah.
Yeah, there's three of the lads over at the Waratahs now. So it's, if I remember correctly, Leonel Oviedo, the hooker from Dogos, Tuti Mojano, the scrum half, and of course...
Yeah, they've gone to
Western Force, Western Force, not the Waratahs.
Yeah.
And of course, Franco Molina, who's going to be back in the UK come the end of the year with Newcastle.
Forgot he signed a 2-year deal to go to Western Force. And then obviously the the Red Bull money come running, so his
Yeah,
plane ticket got reversed,
he
and
obviously
don't blame him.
he missed the UK a few weeks down in Exeter, or season down in Exeter, and he couldn't wait to get back. I
That's
wonder if
it.
he'll find the weather any different up in Newcastle, but that's for him to work out.
I'm sure the money will make it a little bit easier for him. So we've obviously touched on the additional franchise with the Capybaras joining. So we've got the Capybaras, the Dogos, we've got Pampas, and
Arucas.
is it Arucas? That's it. So that's the 4 Argentinian teams. We've then got Cobras in Brazil, Yakara in
Yeah,
Paraguay,
we've got Yacare in Paraguay, yeah.
and then Snelknam in Chile.
Selknam in Chile.
Fuck me, the last one.
Shall I quiz you, or shall I
Penarol.
Penarol, top man.
No, Penarol. So yeah, Penarol is obviously the 3 times champions from Uruguay. There's been a bit of movement around, obviously, with the new franchise coming in. Just a quick one on that. Do you think that's actually going to strengthen the league or weaken it? Because obviously there's been a bit of a movement from Dogos across to the Capybaras, because a lot of them were regional based. Players originally from the Littoral region have gone back to obviously that region now to play for the Capybaras. Dogos seem to have taken a bit of a battering, but I don't think, from looking at the socials and looking at the squad, I don't think they're going to be as weakened as most people would be worried.
I think that's definitely, yeah. I think you're onto something, really. I mean, there has always been an intention with the regional franchises in Argentina to have a local representation. So the attempt, because Argentina has such a strong club heritage, obviously rugby is a big sport in Argentina, much bigger than it is in lots of other South American countries. There is really good local player talent available. So the majority of each of the 4 franchises is made up of local players, but obviously there is also kind of a national outlook, I suppose, because you don't want a particular franchise to be under strength. And I think actually last season is probably the way to look at how Capybaras are going to get on, because Tarukas joined the league for the first time last season. And again, there were doubts about, can you get up to speed that quickly? They were in the race for the playoffs right until the final round of regular action. So I think the Argentine Union, looking at the players that have gone to Capybaras, I think it's been pretty smart. Not only have they got some really experienced Super Rugby Americas players from Dogos, they've also got a couple from Pampas that have gone over, and crucially the head coach from Dogos, the title-winning head coach from a couple of years ago, Nicolas Galatro, has also gone across to Capybaras. So they're going to be, they've got some nous about them, as well as some players that are getting that experience for the first time. In terms of whether it makes a league stronger, I think definitely, because it adds that level of unpredictability. And as a fan, as a spectator, what you want is that sense of, who's going to perform, who's coming into the season stronger, and we can get onto that. I think Dogos on paper look as though they've lost quite a few, and they've lost players, I guess, in 2 directions. On the one hand, as you mentioned, they've lost players at the top end over to Europe. So they've lost their whole front row from last season. Boris Wenger, Leonel Oviedo, Pedro Delgado, 2 of those props are over in Harlequins. The hooker now over in Western Force, as you mentioned.
Force, yeah.
So a lot of that Dogos success in recent years, I mean, they've made the last 3 finals and won one of them, has been based on real dominance up front. Traditional Argentine rugby, they're based out of Cordoba, they're physical, they're nasty, very, very powerful set piece. Can they kind of rebuild that or sustain that without their whole front row? We'll see. But when I look at the list of players, some of the high-profile ones, I agree, have gone to Europe, and as we're going to discuss, some others have gone over to Capybaras, a new franchise. But there's real quality in that squad. I mean, they've got Argentina international still, especially in the presence of the centre Faustino Sanchez Valerole, who's an unbelievably talented player. He's already got 1 cap for Argentina. He's only 21.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't be writing Dogos off just yet. Yes, it looks like it could be a transitional year after a real period of success, 3 finals in a row, but I wouldn't be ruling them out just yet.
No, I think they've got a lot of hopes. They've always kept eyes on youth players coming through, and they've got. I think everyone saw that obviously Boris Wegner and Pedro Delgado went. They were already blooding in the replacements at the end of last season, starting to get them through a little bit more. I remember watching them against Pampas, I think it was, or Selknam, or what. And literally, I think they must have scored 4 or 5 tries on the bounce just from pick and goes under the post. They literally as you said, the forward dominance is just so critical for the Dogos. And having, was it Moyana, the 9, just being able to just snipe around the breakdown was critical for them. Do you think they're going to continue with that style of play, or do you think they're going to have to adapt while they regenerate possibly?
It's a good question. I guess the answer comes from the way they've played up to this point. I mean, it doesn't come out of nowhere. It doesn't exist in a vacuum. There's a lot of Cordoba-based players out of there, and that is the style of rugby that is being coached in Cordoba. It's physical, it's aggressive, it's direct. That's not going to go away overnight just because they've lost a few props to Harlequins, and whether or not they can match the intensity and the quality. I mean, the set piece gave them such field position from which you're able to sort of just grind teams down. I mean, we love kind of black and white discussions in sport, don't we? It's rarely as simple as that. But, for anyone who's not aware, Dogos, this big Cordoba-based side, hugely successful. Pampas, the Buenos Aires-based side, huge rivalry because they're the two kind of older Argentine franchises. On the one hand, Pampas are the ones who play very expansive rugby, incredible backs. Dogos, brutal, aggressive rugby up front. Of course, it's not as simple as that. Dogos have got great backs, just like Pampas have great forwards. But I'll be really interested to see how that rivalry continues this year, because Pampas have finished first in the regular table the last 2 seasons, only to twice lose to Dogos in the final a couple of years ago, in the semi-final last year. And again, I was at that semi-final. Pampas were at home, and Dogos just did a number on them. They were too physical, they were too aggressive, and Pampas had all the ball, all the possession. Dogos seemed pretty content to let them have it, because as soon as they got their opportunity to score, they were clinical. And that, again, one of the big storylines going into the season is, can Pampas finally deliver on the promise of the last couple of years? They've been the best team the last 2 years in the regular seasons, only to choke in the playoffs. And that seems harsh, but you've got to get a league title to prove those doubters wrong.
It was literally down to the last game, even into the playoffs, as you were saying, last season, because we had Snelkenham obviously managed to sneak in on the last game, didn't they, into the top. But then obviously you literally had Tarukas in the conversation. Obviously the Cobras were kind of well adrift, weren't they? But Yakari were up there as well. The 6 teams out of the 7 that were in there was obviously very competitive. Penarol were clear for a period of time as well at the top of the league, and then what I thought was going to be the Warren Gatland effect come in. He turned up as a what was it? What was his technical name?
I think it was a consultant
or something. Yeah. So, and then they literally lost 2 on the bounce since he turned up, didn't he? And then they managed to turn it round in the playoffs, and it was close call for him, because it could have gone badly.
Precisely. I mean, they got a lot of headlines with Warren coming in. I went over to Uruguay and I interviewed him, and the guys over there spoke really, really highly of him, as you'd expect, someone of that kind of caliber coming in. But, what do you want as a fan if not parity, right? Going into the final weekend, you're right, Cobras didn't win a game last season, so they were very much adrift at the bottom. But apart from that, you've got 6 sides, all of whom were looking to get in the playoffs right down to the final weekend. Selknam, as you say, looked down and out with maybe 4 rounds to play. And then kind of put this run together. I mean, including some really big away victories to sneak into the playoffs.
They beat Penarol on the way
Penarol,
in,
and they beat Dogos, if memory serves me correctly. I mean, they sort of had to go on this incredible run to get in there.
It was impossible, wasn't it? It was just physically impossible, and then they somehow got
it. Well, again, if we've learned anything about Chilean rugby over recent years, is that impossible is a word that is not in their lexicon. But probably ran out of steam. Having got to the semi-final, probably just didn't have anything left in the tank. I mean, they almost played 3 finals in a row just to get there. Penarol had enough to get past them, and then again, we spoke about that final already. Penarol, race away into this lead, and it looks home and dry. I'm sure Gatland had the champagne on ice, and then it looked as though Dogos were going to make it, and there were some nervous Penarol fans in that stadium that day. But again, I mean, as a fan, what more do you want? Genuinely unpredictable outcomes. Multiple teams that can beat anybody on any given day. Yacare, as you said, I mean, Yacare, the Paraguayan franchise, traditionally kind of the weakest of the nations that make up Super Rugby Americas, they beat Penarol 36-8 earlier on in that season. And again, rugby maths or any sporting maths is, 2 + 2 doesn't equal 4 in sport, But if you the Paraguayans are able to beat the Uruguayans 36-8, the Uruguayans can beat the Argentine franchise, and then that Argentine franchise is good enough to have players who can go and play their part in beating the Lions. I mean, it's, you don't have to go too many steps before the results really start looking kind of unfathomable, really.
It's just the gift that keeps on giving, as you said. Like, there is no clear hosed results, pretty much. Like, the amount of games that was probably won by a point or 2 or 3 points was quite a sizable amount throughout that league because it was so close. It was not just because the teams are rubbish. It was just because they're so competitive that it was literally the amount of times that teams would get so far ahead, then switch off, or a yellow card. They love a yellow card down there as well, don't
There's
they?
a few yellows got thrown around.
As it's literally like a confetti at times. Like they do get thrown around a fair bit, which probably brings teams back into games. But that's all about game management, and like we also love that excitement that it is that jeopardy of what could go on. But I had the pleasure of actually chatting with Ben Donald before Christmas, who played for the Cobras, and he was sort of saying that even with the Brazil side, a lot of their issue is mentality. Is obviously because they weren't. Like he said, a lot of them would be they'd get a few points behind, and then there'd be like a little bit of bickering internally, and it would sort of they didn't. They'll still work. They're still working on that as a nation. And did you see that a lot within their performances within Super Rugby Americas last year? Because obviously they got a hide in most weekends, didn't they? To be fair,
Yeah, as again, they're kind of the counterpoint to that conversation we're having about how there were 6 really competitive teams, but a lot of that was at the expense of the 7th. And Cobras, they were on the rough end of some bad results last year, and it felt like a step backwards because this year coming will be my 3rd year covering the league out here. The first year I was here, they had some really good results. They beat Penarol, and they looked like they were going to take that next step, and ultimately last year was disappointing. There was the head coach, Emiliano Cafera, who's also the head coach of the national team, has since left the post. He left quite abruptly. I'm not sure anyone's quite got to the bottom of what went on there yet. The Brazilian side has always had a slightly different outlook to the other side. So, for example, the comparison that's often made is between Cobras in Brazil and Yacaré in Paraguay, because both of them are traditionally slightly weaker rugby nations. The Paraguayans have relied quite heavily over the years on Argentine players to kind of supplement the local players, and gradually they've tried to increase their local contingent. The Brazilians went another tack, and they tried to only have a handful of foreigners. Last season, they only had 5 non-Brazilian qualified players in the squad. And ultimately, I think last year, the gap between the quality of those Brazilian players, some of whom are really talented. I mean, their hooker, Andy Pinheiro, is kind of a man mountain, and it often is kind of feels like he's carrying this team on his back at times. This season, I think they've gone into it with a different outlook. They've doubled the number of Brazilian qualified players to 10, including 6 South Africans this year, which again is a different flavour to add to the league, which is prior to that largely been occupied only by South Americans with a few exceptions. So Cobras will be stronger this year, and Josh Reeves, who's going to be taking over the head coaching role, having done that role with Brazil as well. He knows what he's about. He's a smart guy, I think. And I'm not saying they're going to, win the title this year. That would be quite some turnaround. They're talking about making a semi-final, but to go from no wins last year to a semi-final this year would be pretty remarkable in of itself. But, they're going to be a tough side to beat this year. And, I think perhaps last year you might think if they weren't a gimmick, they were at least likely to yield 4 or 5 points. I think this season's going to be quite different.
They signed that Roscoe Speckman, the South African Sevens. He's come also in as a technical advisor alongside being a player. Do you think they're going to try and adapt that sort of Sevens style of jouer rugby, just go balls deep, and if we lose 100 to 99, then everyone's had a laugh. If we win 101 to 100, then job done.
Yeah, well, I think again, when we think about these nations, we've got to think about kind of the attitude of the nation to another sport. I mean, Brazil is a nation that likes to entertain when it comes to sport. When I've spoken to the current Uruguay head coach, Rodolfo Ambrosio, who used to be involved with Brazil, likewise spoke to Josh Reeves, as I mentioned. The thing they talk about is how these guys want to express themselves. It's not a part of the world where they want to play boring rugby or boring any sport. Now, sometimes you wonder whether sometimes the ambition is slightly ahead of where the team skill set is. I wouldn't say, I mean, on the individual level, they got some unbelievably good athletes. I mean, someone like Roberto Tenorio in the back line, centre come wing, 6'2", 3", rapid, steps off both feet. They've got star power in the back line, and they've got some top forwards. I mentioned, Andy Pinheiro. They leaked a lot of points last year, and as you said, maybe they're going to get into a tit for tat. But rugby is not traditionally the kind of sport where you get away with that for long. Someone like Roscoe Speckman coming in is really interesting because he's in his late 30s. He's obviously a huge name, in terms of the league. He's a 2-time Olympic medalist. He's got a single cap for the Springboks in 15s as well. Clearly he's going to add quality and rugby knowledge that is on a different level to a lot of their playing staff. The question, how much he still has left to contribute on the pitch. I mean, this is not an easy league to come and just, he's certainly not just going to be here to mess around on the beach. What he can deliver on the pitch remains to be seen, but, certainly his kind of rugby IQ will be massive for them. And, I'd love to see them chuck the ball around because they've got the players who can do real damage if they're given front football.
And when I was speaking to Ben as well, he sort of said there is probably that, because rugby, a lot of the lads that take on rugby usually take it on a lot later, sort of in their 16s, 17s, 18s, after they've sort of come out of their beach football era and stuff like that. So they've probably got a lot of kickers in the team that have probably be able to slot it from many distance. But as you said, the rugby IQ from players that are going to come over and sort of adapt that way will probably help them massively. One other thing he also highlighted was the travel was a killer. And obviously not all of the clubs are cash rich. There's limitations with travel, and he did mention the Brazilians with the Cobras and stuff. A lot of it was bus travel. A lot of it was long journeys. There wasn't many stops. There was maybe that. Do you think they're going to be stronger at home than they are away from home?
Yeah, I think,
because there are two. It's the same as France. Like top 14, some teams you can't beat them at home. Go away from home, they look like they've never played rugby before in their life because they've got a 94-hour bus journey that somehow they've not got a private jet. I don't get.
Yeah, certainly. I think it's worth remembering the kind of distances we're talking about here, right? I mean, this is a big continent. You're crossing mountain ranges. You're crossing massive stretches of land. I mean, Argentina alone, you're getting multi-hour flights and you've barely moved on the map. It's been easier in the last couple of years. So prior to that, there was a USA-based team, the Colorado Raptors, and obviously that was an absolutely brutal, bit of travel when they were involved. They weren't in the league last year, and they're not in the league this year, and it doesn't look like, as far as I'm aware, they're going to be making a return. So that obviously makes the travel easier. But the Sao Paulo journey to Santiago, for example, is not an easy one, and it does take its toll. South American rugby has been pretty good as far as I'm aware. Of course, I don't, when I travel sort of solo. I'm not on these long bus journeys with them. So South American rugby's been pretty good. They organise a lot of the hotels and as much as travel as they can. I mean, it's one of the interesting things moving forwards, and one of the reasons that the league does need to grow commercially is that when you have an international franchise tournament like this, I mean, anyone who's follows the URC will know this. Those costs add up very, very quickly. It's not like the Premiership where you can get anywhere in the UK in a certain number of hours by bus or on a flight if it's one of the longer journeys. These are long haul flights in some cases. And, there is a financial cost to that. And that's certainly one of the interesting questions over the next couple of years. I mean, the league is obviously happening this year and it's fully funded. I know that there are cuts at World Rugby across the world. It's not only in South America, but it remains to be seen about how the league, or whether or not the league can attain true kind of commercial sustainability on the pitch. I mean, the product is improving every year, and there are some really promising stats around the growth of the sport commercially. I mean, viewership, the league is broadcast here on ESPN, and a lot of people get it with their Disney Plus subscription. The league's viewer numbers went up 20% in 2025 compared to 2024, which is really promising. The average attendance last year was over 4,000, and Tarucas over in Tucumán, they got over 9,000 a couple of times in the stadium. There is potential for that, but those flights do add up.
We sort of touched on this briefly beforehand as well, and that the commercial element there, obviously with the MLR in the state that it is, ESPN and Disney they've got the bubble around Super Rugby Americas, but as we sort of said, it hasn't broken out towards the European regions, and there's a lot of demand elsewhere, and I think there's a lot more of a demand than they potentially are aware of at the minute, that it could expand that league, because a lot of people are looking in thinking, how have they managed to go from a league that nearly died before it even started because of COVID to now basically adding a franchise basically every season. We're now up to 8. There's been one added or one change. There's enough people queuing up ready to join in the leagues. How do you vision that commercial element? Because obviously South American countries, as we know, are not well renowned for being affluent with different sports, and sports it's a lot harder. Obviously there's a lot of financial struggles across the world as well, just between governments, etc.
Well, it's a really, really complicated question. I'm going to get my excuse in early there.
Yeah.
You're right to say that there are franchises that want to join that are kind of being, talked about. So there's a lot of discussions about whether or not next year Chile will double the number of franchises, whether they'll get a second franchise, probably in Concepcion, which is a city further south than Santiago. There's been long-standing conversations about whether or not Uruguay will get a second franchise. Obviously, Penarol have had great success in the tournament, so maybe there's enough of a player pool there.
We had Colombia before. We had
There was a
Colombia as
Colombian
well
side,
before.
which fell out. And again, there's massive instability financially. There's massive instability in terms of national funding. So obviously, Chile have been one of the great success stories of recent years, and they've had a lot more central government funding because the national team has done really well. But even so, there was a presidential election very recently in Chile, and I know there was uncertainty about the result of that and what that might mean for the sporting priorities of the government. And when you're trying to build a professional league from scratch across 5 countries, I mean, it's really, really hard to predict. What I would say, and to your point about it feeling a sense of disbelief outside of South America, because it feels like we're in a rugby landscape where clubs are contracting all the time. I mean, the situation in Wales, the situation in the MLR, the idea that there's a region of the world where it seems like every year there's a new team and that sense of excitement that comes with that. I don't want to quash that excitement because we should be excited by that. It's a great thing. And it's really, on a personal note, it's been a really kind of invigorating place to be covering the sport because it feels fresh. It feels exciting. It's also worth pointing out that this is not professional in the same way as your Welsh club sides are professional, or, the Ospreys in Cardiff, etc. The contracts here tend to run 6 months of the year. So these guys are not being paid professionals all year round. We'll get onto this when we get through, some of the other clubs, but certain players this year have decided not to take part in the league because, rugby is a short career. And unlike, being an international in other parts of the world, you haven't got a long career of high-level coaching or punditry ahead of you necessarily, and people have to make sacrifices to play the sport that they love. And it's so hard to predict commercially how the league will fare. What I can say is the league generated more revenue last year than the year before, not only accounting for the extra team, but also kind of even notwithstanding the addition of Tarukas. And I imagine it will do the same this year. The health of the rugby financial landscape is as much a mystery in this part of the world as it is in many others, I'm afraid.
There was a few jungle drums around when obviously the Miami Sharks pulled out of the MLR. They were obviously predominantly an Hispanic team set up. Obviously, there was jungle drums that they would potentially try and add themselves into Super Rugby Americas. There's also mumblings of a Mexican franchise, and I think they're going to be called the Naranjas or something like that. Do you think a lot of this is people are getting ahead of themselves, like obviously seeing it's growing, or there is a long-term plan that this will carry on growing, this will add more, and this will open up doors ahead of that 2031 World Cup in America, and potentially put the MLR in the shadow that it already is? Because obviously the way it's grown, I still think the MLR's got a potential to be a great product. It's just they didn't build it the right way around. Whereas you look at Super Rugby Americas, especially the Argentinians, you look at the model underneath. You've got the top 12. You've got all the other regional teams. You've got a full development squad of all these regions. We one Lucho's who was part of the channel as well. He had the opportunity to speak to Agustin Pichot, who said the way that Argentinian rugby is built from the bottom upwards. Obviously, they've tried to stretch themselves a little bit at the top sometimes, and they've had to fall back a little bit. But the way they're building, there is a clear conveyor belt and a long sustaining ability. They could probably add another two franchises quite easily with the amount of players that are available down through the leagues and queuing ready to come and play rugby at that level. I think the future's exceptionally bright. It's just you've got to make the numbers balance as well and advertise it to a larger audience. That's like 4 to 9,000 fans in a stadium each week. Brilliant. MLR, most clubs have gone bust because they couldn't even get 5,000 a week. I think their average attendance when I did some work for ATR was they're averaging 3,500 fans in a stadium every other week. And like now they've got the California Legion that's going to have 5 separate stadiums. So you get season ticket and you've got to travel to 5 different regions. Like some of these are like getting, like as you said, they're starting to get onto planes because obviously America's, funny enough, not small either. There's
Who
there's a
knew?
bit of
Who
travel
knew?
there. Yeah, imagine that little globe bit is a lie. Do you think there's the right structure above Super Rugby Americas that it doesn't run away and it gets into the state of MLR where it's got 12 franchises and then it's got to get to a point actually we've got to hold back and everyone starts pulling out? Or do you think the right structure at the top is there to protect the product that's moving
Yeah,
forward?
so all the conversations I have with people involved in the league, these are guys who are really, really passionate about seeing the sport grow, not only this
Yeah.
team grow or the league grow. The relationship between Super Americas and, South American rugby, the unions, is much, much closer than the MLR, which is much more of a private enterprise. For better or worse, there are benefits to both systems, of course. So caution is the thing that I'm hearing a lot from these guys. I mean, there are fans are the ones who want to bring in the Sharks or let's go for
Yeah.
another franchise in Chile or Uruguay now. And the league itself, I think, has been pretty wise in kind of urging caution, build the product, build the competitiveness, because you have to have not only the sporting infrastructure ready, you have to have the right number of players, the right caliber of player in order to make a new team worthwhile. But you also need the infrastructure in terms of flights and hotels and all the stuff that we don't want to think about, but is necessary when you're building what is an international league. And we shouldn't, lose sight of that. This is, border crossings and passports and things that, most domestic leagues don't have to worry about. There's nothing from the organizer's point of view that I see as kind of reckless or getting ahead of themselves. I mean, as a fan, we're always impatient, aren't we? We always want, can't we get the second Chilean franchise? I wonder whether there is apprehension about too much close engagement with USA-based teams. Like I said, the Raptors were in the league. The travel is brutal. Let's not get around it, really. I mean, it's a 9-hour flight up to Colorado from here. You don't want to be doing that multiple times a season if you're an Argentinian franchise or a Chilean or whatever. There was talk this year about maybe having kind of an intercontinental finalist plays finalist or winner plays winner to work out who is the king of the Western Hemisphere. But those conversations are very, very early. And likewise, I've also heard whisperings of the Mexican franchise, the Colombians making a return. Those things are very, very early. I'm sure that the infrastructure is being put in place for those things to perhaps come to fruition one day. But the one that looks the most likely at this stage is that Chile might add another franchise next year. And there's long-standing talk about whether or not Argentina will go up to 5. I think the long-term ambition is perhaps to get the league up to 10 or 12 teams. But you don't want to expand in perpetuity because you end up having to get your wings clipped later on down the road. But to Pichot's point, one of the reasons that the league has enjoyed more success here, perhaps, or more sustainability than the MLR, aside from the fact that the USA is a more expensive country to house and pay athletes and fly around, is the fact that in South America, particularly in Argentina, you do have a groundwork, a system of clubs in Buenos Aires, but also throughout the interior of Argentina, with history, with passion, with high quality coaching. And that it's worth its weight in gold when you have an existing fan base who know the sport, who already like the sport, who are willing to watch the sport grow. I mean, like I said, the team with the greatest attendance last year was Tarukas, who are based out in Tucumán. So, I'd be surprised how many people in the UK or wherever the listeners are, could find Tucumán on the map. And yet there was a real rugby hub there already, waiting for a professional team to take up.
I saw it a few times on the old X or Twitter or whatever we call it these days. There's a lot of American fans as well that kind of got completely disillusioned with the MLR because they were bringing in players from overseas for their last payday rather than recruiting American talent. Do you think there's a lot more buy-in for these South American sides as well because they probably went to school with some of the lads or they knew them because that's their brother's mate or they know where they grew up, they know their backstory, they know where they've been. So they're fully invested in making sure that they are 100% behind their region. As we know, Argentinians just they're the easiest people to get on with as well. They're so accommodating, but they live and die for their club, their badge, their country. They are fully invested, and they all like it does seem to they seem to know someone that knows someone that's knows someone that's done this. Like everyone seems to know everyone. It's very much like they got a cousin for a cousin for a cousin. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's
look, I mean, it's human nature, isn't it? It's much easier to buy
yeah,
into a local team, and if that team feels connected to the place it's in, fantastic. And I guess, I mean, look, people who run the MLR are smart people. They're not saying they've never made mistakes, but I sometimes wonder about, does an American, by which I mean a US rugby audience, are they going to have the kind of brand buy-in? If you bring in a big foreign star, are they going to know that guy's career? Are they going to understand why that's a big deal in the same way that, when, I don't know, a New Zealander joins a Prem side, that Prem side's existing fan base is going to have an awareness of what it means to bring in an All Black or whatever. Maybe I'm being patronising to MLR fans, but I'm not sure. But
I
no,
think you are.
I think, certainly I spent the first 4 months of 2024 out in Santiago in Chile and went to a lot of Cheltenham games when I was out there. Massive buy-in from local people, and a real family affair, which is the other thing. One of the reasons that, Capybaras, they've got, a lot of them are named after sort of slightly, or, named after animals, is there is a desire to make the league a really attractive prospect to families. And obviously, where there are families, there are kids, and where there are kids, there are future stars. So there has been an awful lot of buy-in. I mean, the Pampas games, normally afterwards, obviously they're the games I attend most often because I'm based in Buenos Aires. Almost always there's the kids and the parents run on afterwards, and there's half an hour on the pitch afterwards with all of the fans, mingling with the players. And as you say, having photos with them, and it's kind of hard to work out who knows who at that point.
I love that though. There's like they do that over here in Spain. You can get the kids get on the pitch. Like that for me is probably the best way to get kids involved in the game. Is by them to meet the players, meet the fans, and it's different because like my boys they're dabbling in between rugby and boxing and football, and like they always still talk about we went to watch Spain against Brazil and Canada, Brazil, and USA, and we were able to get on the pitch afterwards. They were able to meet the players. My boy's still got autographs that he still tells everyone about, that he managed to meet all these international rugby players. And like, even if he never goes to play rugby, like they're the sort of memories that you remember as a kid. You get that. Like, I'm sure you probably did as a kid. You had a book full of autographs. You couldn't remember who they are now because like it just looks squiggles, but you remember the memory. And that's the bit we got to try and not do with the game, because obviously all the fans were able to get on the pit together. We all sit together. We all have a laugh. There's a bit of banter and stuff. There's no malice. Like there's a lot of players that seem to be sort of shielded away. I know obviously the safety side of it, but just let the kids on, let them run riot, and then let them go and meet the players, and then like have a kick around, and then they talk about that story for it. And do you think that also helps a lot of the clubs there to keep the families engaged? It's easy to let the kids get involved and see their faces at the end of it. It makes every penny worth it.
Definitely, I think. I mean, there's a massive culture, as there is in Spain where you are, of kind of, life is pretty intergenerational. There isn't that sense of kids don't go to that, grandparents. In Argentina and Spain and a lot of Latin countries, if parents are going, well, why wouldn't kids go? So quite often the at the Pampas games, for example, the big stand on the far side. I'm obviously over there with the press in the cheap seats. The paying clientele, rightly, are in the good seats. And there's a football pitch behind where there's 50 kids who, as soon as it's half time, they run off there, play 10 minutes of football. They're straight back over to the stands in time for the second half. And, again, one doesn't want to over romanticize these things because, these are people trying to make a living. And in Argentina's case, I mean, this is a project that's designed to try and make Argentina a team that's going to win the World Cup. I mean, no one's here for a charity. But, from my perspective, sometimes you're sat there and you do sort of think this is much more reminiscent of the moments I fell in love with the sport when I was very young than it is something, rugby that I've watched in the last 10 years. It does feel kind of more akin to those earlier memories. I mean, it's a fantastic league to follow. If anyone's not getting through the enthusiasm through this episode, it is such a privilege to be out here following the league. It's the players are, really open. The coaches are open. They want to talk. They want to tell you about what they're doing in a way that, inevitably in bigger, more established leagues, press officers and people are a little bit more cautious around the media. Here people want to throw open the doors and they want to talk to you and they want to explain what they're doing because they're really proud of it, and they should be, because it's a hell of a league.
Super impressive. So back to actually the league and the league ahead. So we got 8 teams in. Right. So we obviously saw Penarol won it last year. Dogos nearly robbed it at the death. Cobra's at the bottom end of the table. A few teams moving around at the minute, as we said. What's your vision of the league table before we get to the playoffs? How do you see it much different? Do you see, are you going to nail your balls to the wall on anything,
Well,
or is there teams to watch? Should we say
it's the
instead?
guaranteed
Or?
way of bring the journalists on and make him look stupid, isn't it? Where in 6 weeks, people will be saying, "Oh, you were wrong about this." Of course, we'll be wrong about all kinds of things. That's the beauty of it. Wouldn't it be boring if I knew what was going to happen? The team, if I was to make kind of a bolder prediction, the one I'd be really encouraging people to pay attention to would be Cheltenham. I think Cheltenham, and again, I'll just remind everyone, it's the Chilean franchise, and anyone who's not aware, and I'm sure your listeners will know all this already because they know their stuff. Chile obviously qualified for the World Cup last year. They beat Samoa over 2 legs. It was unbelievable. I couldn't get there, and it still haunts me that I didn't get over there to Valparaiso for the second win. But Chilean rugby has never been here before. It's never been in this position. It's on a high, and their squad, they've had a couple of players leave. Javier Eisman, the second row, went over to Europe. Likewise, Iñaki Gurruchaga, the kind of larger than life tight head prop, it was really important for them. He's gone over to the D2 in France. 2 players leaving. It's not the worst thing in the world, and they've got some massive stars back. I mean, to bring back Yo-Yo Fernandez, Rodrigo Fernandez, anyone who's not aware of this guy, he's like Chilean rugby royalty. He scored World Rugby Try of the Year back when they qualified for their first ever World Cup. When they beat the USA to qualify for 2023. He's this incredibly important figure. The last time I was at a Chile international, he wasn't even playing, and yet it was still a load of people wearing cutouts of his face. So, he's a big star. He's back. He's been in Italy for a couple of years. They've brought in Lucas Berti, international scrum half. They look strong. They've got virtually the entire Chilean national team available. They've got a settled coaching staff. Jake Mangin, this is his 3rd season as head coach. I think there is a feeling that if not now, when for Chile for Cheltenham, to possibly go and win the title. So they would be my. I don't want to call them an outside bet because they were semi-finalists last year and they're a really good side, but they've never won the title before, and this could be it. And as I mentioned, next year there's every possibility that player pool will be split in half with the creation of a second Chilean franchise. So there will never be this much Chilean talent concentrated in the capital again. So they would be a real dark horse for the title for me. Of course, having never won the title before, they have to be dark horses, I suppose.
For those that obviously don't watch them, what do you think their style is? Because obviously we talk about Dogos. For me, I think they're probably the perfect mix of both. They'd love to get physical, but they don't half get it wide where they want to.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. So Jake's a New Zealander by trade, the head coach, and he's also the attack coach for Chile. And again, anyone who watched those Chile wins over Samoa know that they like to chuck the ball around. They play a really expansive offloading game. It's very intense, high pace, but there's a real abrasiveness tied to that, as you mentioned. I mean, anyone who's so one of my favorite rugby players, just period, is this guy Raimundo Martinez. Plays hooker, plays open side. I thought he was very unlucky not to be the league's most valuable player last year. Ended up going to Simon Benitez Cruz, so shout out to all the Newcastle fans. But this guy is like, he had his Weetabix every morning before game day. He's like a live wire. You put 50p in him and he just goes. Unbelievable over the ball, kind of a diminutive guy, great jackler, but he carries for days, seems to find himself in the right part of the pitch all the time. And there's a kind of manic energy to the way they play. I mean, they've got, obviously this is going to be added to with Rodrigo Fernandez, Yo-Yo coming back, as I mentioned, he's a fly half, but often they played with 2 playmakers, whether it was Thomas Salas at fullback or Juan Cruz Reyes at 10. So they can play that expansive game because they've got a playmaker either side of the ruck. They've got great strike runners. And again, Nicholas Saab, who's this 20-year-old who came out of nowhere last year, scored against Samoa, scored against Italy in the autumn. He's this kind of electric live wire winger. They've got threats all over the park. I mean, they can beat you up front. They can go around you out wide. They can move the ball. They can win ugly. I think they're a real threat this year.
I remember seeing Nicholas Saab sort of blast onto the scene with that sort of Superman diving try into the corner and thinking, how is that physically possible for any human? But to then not drop the ball as well, it was something else. And I agree. I think they timed everything perfect last season, but obviously they basically played 3 finals in the lead up to that. Their semi against Penarol, it was probably a step too far for them.
And they had injuries. I mean, they lost
Yeah, they
Martin
did.
Segrin, who's the Chile national team captain. Really abrasive back rower. He rejoined the side last season, having been away for a few years abroad, and he looked $1 million in those first few rounds. His loss, he had an ACL injury. That was a huge loss for them, and it looked like it was going to be a big loss for Chile as well. But they've still managed to get over the line. He's back this year. Domingo Saavedra, the centre, also got out, and he's an experienced player. He's back. And again, the addition of those players. I mean, they've got the biggest squad by a mile of all the teams this year. So you'd imagine that they have the depth this season, perhaps they didn't have in previous years, to sustain a title challenge, even if they do get 1 or 2 knocks.
Be a fun one. So the defending champions, Penarol, probably a few question marks around the amount of players that they've let leave of such ilk as well. There's been quite an exodus from them. Do you think that's going to seriously affect them? There's a lot of Uruguayans quite concerned by the transfer activity over there.
Yeah, I mean, let's discuss some of the players who are not involved first, and then we'll get on to it because there was a couple of good additions as well. But obviously, again, it's worth remembering that there is, unlike a lot of club leagues around the world, there is also a national team perspective that plays into this. And last season, it was crucial that Uruguay had all their best players available because it was a qualification year. They did qualify. So next year, of course, is a big year because it's the World Cup year. This year doesn't mean it's not an important year, but of course, if you're going to take a year off to recover from injuries or, to study, a lot of these guys are finishing university degrees, so a lot of them have started businesses they need to dedicate more time to. This is a year to do it. So in terms of some of the high-profile players that are not available, Felipe Echeverri is the one that really stands out to me, the fly half. Not only is he a lovely guy, but he's a really, really top player. He's been dealing with sort of a niggling shoulder injury. He wants to give that some time to recover. And also, as I mentioned, he's looking at 30 and he's probably got to think about his career post-rugby. I know he's, exploring kind of what he's going to do. And, we have to remember that these guys are not earning the kind of money that a Premiership player or URC player is earning. Other important players they might be missing. So the scrum half, Alvarez, who's again a really top player. Carlos Deuce, who's a really abrasive back rower. He's another one.
Where's Alvarez gone? He was absolutely dynamite during the November internationals when he was electric for them and probably the man of the match for most of their games during that November internationals. So
if memory serves, he and Carlos Deuce are finishing off degrees, which obviously, when you're playing rugby, you're constantly putting that module on hold or that assignment on hold. And, they want to be back, obviously, for the July internationals. The plan is that they'll be playing for Uruguay because obviously, with this new Tier 2 competition, there's a lot of opportunity to get kind of international recognition later in the year. But for the first half of the year, a lot of those guys are prioritising life away from rugby. I know Felipe Echeverri said he's going to be playing with some of his brothers at their old club. So it's kind of it's one of those strange reminders of, the quality that these guys have to compete with really, really top players for their country and sometimes in the latter stages of Super Rugby Americas rounds, but how close some of the rugby here still feels to an amateur world. There was no professional rugby in most of these countries 5 years ago, 6 years ago. So it's the idea that someone like him can go from playing with his brothers at his local club to then going and playing for Uruguay in the summer is something that still takes some getting used to, I think.
When you're that talented, like he is a talent. His boot is like a metronome for him. It's perfectly timed last season. Just kept the ball ticking. That probably kept Penarol in most games as well. Was just his boot, and when it wasn't going, they were out of most games, weren't they? When he forgot to bring his boots along, they knew that. It's probably not our day today.
Yeah, and again, for him, I mean, he probably didn't know how important those conversions were going to be in the final because they were racing into a lead. But I think he hit 5 or 7 from 7. I thought, no, 5 from 5 he hit.
Yeah.
And obviously they ended up winning by a point. So, he certainly brought his boots that day. But someone like him, I mean, when Uruguay played Scotland a couple of years ago, he missed some kicks, and ultimately that game is one that maybe got away from Uruguay. They were in it until the last 10 minutes, and he missed a few. so for him to come back from that disappointment and to go and, nail 5 from 5 in the final to beat Dogos was a big moment for him. But, they've got some players, who aren't competing this year, but they've kind of populated the ranks largely with guys from the under-20s, which I understand why people are thinking, well, maybe there's going to be a drop-off in performance. But, if you're thinking with your kind of medium-term Uruguay hat on, these guys they've got to get this experience, and this is the highest level of rugby in the region for them to play. The big signing they've made is the return of Manuel Ardao from Miami Sharks, the now defunct MLR team, as you mentioned. I mean, he was the league's best player when he was here in 2023, when Penarol won the league. He was, one of the best tier 2 players of any nation at the Rugby World Cup in France. Could well be, the best jackler you've never heard of. I mean, he's so good over the ball.
Phil.
Yeah.
Phil.
The guy is, it might end up being that come the end of his career, it's a travesty we never got to see him in a top, European league or in Super Rugby Pacific perhaps, because, he really is, he's a diminutive guy. He's not a massive guy, but he is a top player. And him coming back, they might have the best back row in the competition, even with all those people leaving. I mean, Lucas Bianchi, Manuel Ardao, and Manuel Diana is a phenomenally good back row for this level. I mean, all three of those guys,
start for Uruguay pretty much, don't they? Apart from Deuce probably normally gets in most of the time.
But they're really blessed in that area. So Ardao, he's a really big player coming back. They've also done, some smart other recruitment. I mean, they've brought in a winger whose name is Maroldo from Newman, who's an Argentine winger. He was brilliant for Newman last year when they won the Buenos Aires Championship, and he looks, I think he's got 8 and 12 last year for them. He looks ready to make that step up. So, a lot of unknowns about Penarol. I think that's certainly the case. How strong a title defence are they going to be able to put together without those players? But, write them off at your peril, because there are some, like I said, Manuel Ardao was the league's best player when he left, and he's come back at a time when everyone's saying, Penarol are going to struggle this year. Let's wait and see.
I think the fans are just being fans.
Well, of course,
they're a little bit just like, hold on, this doesn't look like the normal side, because Thomas Echeverry is the fullback for him still as well. He's the brother of Felipe, is that right?
I think is he in the league this year? I'd have to check the roster.
I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure. I know he was still around last season, unless he's obviously disappeared off. It wasn't on the list, the exit list that I saw. So whether he's just refusing to leave, I don't know. But again, I mean, good player.
Yeah,
well.
there are some really good lads out there who aren't, who aren't the kind of names we've mentioned. But again, do you want those Uruguayan fans who are also Penarol fans? It's that classic thing about what do you want now versus what do you want later. I mean, there'll be guys in this season who get minutes who wouldn't have otherwise got minutes that might well be playing for Uruguay at the 2027 World Cup, and they're going to be better for the minutes they get in this tournament.
It's obviously they cover the Rugby Europe Championships as well. I know we've strayed a little bit, but the Georgians have obviously had a bit of a management change, and they're looking for this season in between for a lot of rotation for players to make sure that they've got that strength in depth, because you don't know what's going to happen this season / into next, who picks up an injury. So through the pessimism of being a fan, there's probably the optimism of the management and the national side that actually the eye is on the World Cup in 27 rather than Super Rugby Americas 26.
Quite possibly for the Uruguayans. But again, I mean, it's one of the things that when I talk to people who aren't familiar with the league, and you tell them the countries that are involved, the assumption I think people have is that the Argentine teams win all the time. Like I said, Penarol are the most successful team in the competition's history. They've won 3 titles. And we should love the fact that Uruguayan fans are kind of slightly annoyed that their team isn't at full strength, because they expect to win the tournament. They think it's their tournament. And that's fantastic, because you've got Argentina, beating the Lions last year, beating the All Blacks, beating Australia, one of the very best international sides, and yet you have these Uruguayan guys at Penarol, and when it comes to Super Rugby Americas, they think it's their tournament, and I think that's brilliant.
It's just the way it's played is, I fell in love with it, and obviously you're amongst it, so there's a reason to. The team that finished top last season during the league format was Pampas. How do you envision their season? Obviously, you don't want to piss too many people off because you go there quite often on their doorstep. So don't want things being thrown at you as you walk down the street.
No. I mean, I'm more than happy to speak my mind on it. I mean, look, like I said, I've spoken to the head coach Juan Manuel Leguizamon a few times. They're brilliant to watch. I mean, it's great having them as a local side because get on the train to go up to the games normally of an evening. They're fantastic to watch. They put on a great spread, great food available. The rugby's fantastic. They throw the ball around. They often score 5, 6, 7 tries. They've got to win the title. Ultimately, I think there is that feeling that they are the team of the capital city of the biggest rugby nation in the competition, and they've failed to win the title despite being the best team in the regular season the past 2 years. I think they need to get that monkey off their back. They've had some big player losses as well. I mean, again, another example of some of that. I think the thing that surprises people is the quality of player coming out of this league and what they're able to do really quickly. I mean, I know people like Pollock rightly, got headlines last year for being breakthrough players. But, for me, someone like Justo Picardo, the Argentina centre, literally, I've watched him for the last couple of years for Pampas and always thought he was a top player. I thought in the England-Argentina game at the end of the autumn, he might have been the best player on the pitch last year. I mean, he was phenomenally good, physical, abrasive, beat the Lions, as I've said, played almost every game for Argentina last year, straight out of a Super Rugby Americas season. He's now at Montpellier, and he'll be a loss. He'll be difficult to replace. Joaquin Morro is also at Leicester now. For me, the big loss that I look at, not that Picardo isn't the headline loss, but for me, the big loss when I look at depth is probably Thomas Repetti, the tight head, who's now gone to Toulouse, and he is a supremely talented player, 20 years old, tight head. Passes like a fly half, moves like a centre, but, is 20 stone or whatever he is. Where Pampas came unstuck the last 2 seasons was against Dogos. The grunt of it was the physicality, it was a set piece. So to lose him, again, he's obviously been capped by Argentina as well, Repetti, last year. To lose a tight head of that calibre, I think, are those same doubts, those same questions going to rear their ugly head again? A few other players, they've gone. Manuel Bernstein, who's captained them, he's gone to Capybaras. Nicolas Damorin, who's a really abrasive back row of theirs. He's not in the squad because he's got a long-term injury this year. So they look slightly lighter up front. In the back line, they look as impressive as ever. I mean, they've also probably made
Tobias Wade there.
Tobias Wade. A few guys have come in from the Argentina 7 circuit who just look ready to hit the ground running. They've still got Santiago Pernas. I'm amazed that he hasn't been picked up by somebody in Europe yet. Capped for Argentina last year. And scored, I think, against Munster and the Argentina 15 tour as well. Someone like him, he's probably looking at this season as this is the one where if I have another good year, exactly, another big European side will come for me. But the big signing that Pampas have made is kind of at the other end. They've brought in Santiago Cordero, 56 cap Argentina international, and it's kind of one of the first times the league has looked to those really experienced. I mean, the guys, like I said, 12 months ago, or not even 7 months ago, he was scoring the winning try against the Lions for Argentina. He's only 32 and he's now, playing in Super Rugby Americas. So, his experience maybe will help them get over the line in they're going to be there or thereabouts again. They've never been far away from the playoffs or the title. But until they get that first star, people are going to continue to question whether they've got it in them.
Managed to bring Batistuta Farise over from Penarol as well, and they've added a few players. Do you really do you think it's going to be down to their design of play that could potentially it's going to be their Achilles heel again? The jouet rugby that against some of these dogged teams that are willing to front them up, is that where they're going to come unstuck?
I mean, it's a good question. I don't know. It's hard to predict whether or not it's a mental thing. I mean, it's only been Dogos really that have managed to do that to them. It's not because other teams haven't tried. I mean, when they're in full flight, they look like the best team in the competition. They look, pretty irrepressible at times. Like I said, the semi-final last year, I probably, I'm not a betting man, but I probably would have stuck something on Pampas to get it done because they just looked like they were ready to step up to that. But again, we then have the question marks about are they going to face the same Dogos as years gone by? Can Dogos do that to teams now, having lost that front row that we discussed earlier on? So again, unknowns, which is what you want going into a season. Pampas, I have very little doubt, will be involved at the latter end of this tournament. They always seem to be.
100%.
And, unlike some of the other teams, they've got a really settled coaching staff. Leguizamon's entering his 3rd year. The players love him. They play a really expansive brand. When it works, they blow teams away. When it doesn't, Dogos seemed to get one over them. But again, that's a game in round 2. It's the first home game for Pampas. I'll be there on the 28th. I cannot wait for that one. And we'll know a lot more then. I mean, after those first 2 rounds, we'll have a much clearer sense of where the power lies in Argentine Super Rugby Americas franchises this year.
We've obviously got Tarukas as well. Obviously, they've lost a few. They've gained a few. They've obviously lost Benitez Cruz to the cash cow that is Newcastle at the minute. Thomas Medina's gone as well. Nicolas Roger was a good player again last season for them. They've managed to keep Vivas though as well, which is I think is probably a bigger coup for them than actually potentially some of the players they've lost. Where do you think they stand? Do you think they're stronger or they're weaker, or do you think they're going to be there or thereabouts, having a sniff at the playoffs, but not quite there yet?
It's a good question. I think when you enter a team as a league as a new team, there's all bets are off really, and I think they certainly overperform my expectations. The idea they could come together that quickly and perform as well as they did, and Simon Benitez Cruz is probably a good example of the way this league works. I mean, I interviewed him a few months ago, and he was telling me that it was his first professional contract he'd ever signed. He played a few games as kind of an invitational player the season before for Pampas. This offer came to go to Tarukas, Tucumán, to move up sticks and go off to a different city. And he sort of thought, well, why not? And he only signed the contract, I think, 5 weeks before the season began. And last season, he was the most valuable player and, has since played 7 or 8 games for Argentina and gone off to Newcastle. So, this league has the potential to springboard guys from complete obscurity right up to the top league. So, they're going to struggle to replace that duo in particular at halfback. I think, Benitez Cruz and Roger, they just seem like they've been playing together all their lives last year. Benitez Cruz, rapid, loves a snipe. Roger, cool, calm, collected. And actually, we saw that combination at the end of the year rip Wales to pieces. I mean, those are the 2 starting halfbacks for Argentina against Wales. So again, the ability to bridge that gap of quality to international rugby, it was on display. For me, they've got real quality out wide. Pasquini is an unbelievably talented winger. They've also brought in an experienced international, Matthias Orlando, again, 40, 50 caps for Argentina. So, he'll come in and I'm sure will replace Medina in the centre, kind of guys at opposite ends of their career, but still got tons of quality. The bit of business that I think looks really smart from them is to bring in Nicolas Parada-Height, who's this big, abrasive back rower. He was at Yacaré last year, but he's Argentine. He looks a really good bit of business because he's so abrasive, so physical, guarantees you front football, 17, 18 stone. I think he's a really, really smart addition. Plays 6 or 8 normally. Hard to predict where they'll be exactly, but with a settled squad mostly, if they can replace the balance provided by those 2 halfbacks, I think they've added really nicely in other areas to perhaps go one step further and make the semi-final. But as we mentioned, last season's performers won't be enough to get into the semi-final this year. The quality has increased across the board and, everyone's going to have to be better. If you got 4th place last year, you need to be better to get 4th place this year.
Agreed. We've obviously pretty much covered the Dogos and we've covered Capybaras already as well. Leaves us the Capybaras, the new franchise in town. Nobody's left because obviously there was nobody to leave. They've not technically got a core backbone of players. They've gathered some very shrewd signings though. They've obviously managed to acquire a few off Dogos, but the ones that stand out for me was Lautaro Cipriani and Juan Bastida Baronio. Just him at 10, Baronio was just, for Dogos was critical when he was just same as when Echeverri had his kicking boots. It was just keep that board ticking, and I think that also kept Dogos in. Do you see them being a dark horse for anything this season? Do you think?
Yeah, I think so. 7 of the Capybaras squad have actually won this competition, despite it being their debut season. So it's not a bad kind of start in life to get 7 former winners with Dogos and a former head coach who's won the competition with Galataro as well. Cipriani, as you mentioned, is a top player. I think he's 21, 22, plays on the wing, rapid, steps off both feet. Another guy who I think, Contepomi was looking at pretty closely last year. Didn't end up getting capped, but went with the Argentina 15 on tour. And he's another one, a bit like Pernas, that might be looking, if I have a good run of games and I can score a few tries this year, the world's my oyster. I could be capped by the end of the year. I could be getting a contract abroad. So if he has a year like last year where he was, unplayable at times, he could be in the mix. Baronio, you're right, is a really interesting one. Probably slightly less mercurial than Echeverri. Echeverri, I think when he takes the ball to the line, kind of has a lovely balance to his game. Baronio, a little bit more conservative in his style of play, but unbelievable boots, physical. And again, he's one of those players that when you watch him live, you hear him. He's barking orders constantly. Probably didn't have his best game in the final last year. And so for someone like him, I suspect unfinished business. He struggled a little bit at times, made a few mistakes against Penarol. And like I said, there'll be a lot of Dogos players from last season with axes to grind, because that one, they'll feel like they could have got that win if they hadn't got off to such a poor start. He's obviously not with Dogos anymore, but he's got an opportunity to really be a senior figure at this new club. So it's very, very hard to predict with a new side how they're going to do. If the example of Taroukas is anything to go by, the people in charge of assigning where these players go, the Argentine National Union, who obviously have a lot of oversight in where some of these players are, if last season's anything to go by, they know what they're doing, because they managed to get Taroukas from never having played a game of rugby to being within, a few points of the playoffs on the final weekend. So, I wouldn't rule them out at this stage. It'd be an amazing ask for any new team to go and win the competition. So I wouldn't be betting on that either. But, they've got some top players. And Bernstein as well, a guy back rower in from Pampas. He's captained Pampas in the past. He's a senior player. They'll be tough to beat from the off, I expect. But again, like Taroukas, they'll probably also get better as the season goes on and the more time they spend together.
So they got Height in as well from Pampas as well, haven't they? They've got
Bruno Height at the centre. Again, they've got plenty of league experience. It's just a case of how quickly. You mentioned all the teams from pre-season. Most of the teams started about 10 days ago. You've got about 4 or 5 weeks to get these guys together, which is not nothing, but it's very different if you're bringing a load of guys who've played together for the last couple of years back compared to guys who might not have played together before.
Do you think with the Capybaras set up, getting the right coaching has been crucial there? That will build it from the ground up rather than trying to worry about star signings. If you get the right management model in with that experience to build that franchise properly, that will make them serve themselves better within the league rather than just coming in and just be the whipping boys as most starting sides do.
I think definitely. I think Galatro is someone really, really respected within Argentina, within the kind of coaching fraternity. He's got a lot of admirers. He's a pretty intimidating guy when you see him up close. He's a big guy. You sort of get the sense he's probably quite a hard taskmaster. But I think one thing that we shouldn't underestimate is, yes, they've got these guys in who've experienced this league before. There was a lot of local players, a lot of players from the Litoral region who are going to be playing for Capybaras for the first time. I'm not saying they haven't had great coaching at their clubs, but they're going to be exposed to a new level of professionalism, of not only from Galatro, but also from these other pros that they're dealing with for the first time. Some of these guys have been involved in Argentina camps. They've worked with Contepomi. They've worked with, Galatro at Dogos. So it's not only that you kind of, if you think about a normal professional league, if you will, where you get a load of guys together and you hope they become more than the sum of their parts. A lot of these guys are going to be getting better week by week, month by month, because they're being exposed to a level of professionalism, a caliber of coaching, a quality of teammate that they've never experienced before with their local clubs. So this one of the great things about this league, I know I'm repeating myself here, but it is just so unpredictable. There will be guys from the Litoral region who've been watching as Cordoba get their team, Buenos Aires get their team, Tucumán get their team, desperate for this opportunity, and they're not going to want to give up without a fight. And Argentina is a fiercely proud nation, and its provinces are fiercely proud. And anybody who thinks that when you go to these Dogos Pampas games or Taroukas Pampas or any of these derbies, they get on fine when they're with Argentina, but there's plenty of spite and plenty of bad blood, so they'll be wanting to get one over their opponents as much as they can.
Oh, mate, I just the passion from you being part of it, and I fell in love with the league. It's for those that haven't obviously had the opportunity. It's definitely one of them. It's the time to get into it, because the hard yards have been done, and now they're probably going to see the better bit. We're coming towards the end now, I think, mate. But I think it's time to put you on the spot. Finals contenders. Who's going to be in the final?
Ooh, right, gun to my head, I think Cheltenham are going to get over the line. I think Cheltenham are going to win the competition. And again, I look forward to hearing everyone tell me I'm wrong when they finish fifth. I think Cheltenham can get over the line, and I think it will be a Cheltenham Pampas final.
Biggest surprise?
I think Cobras. I think purely because I don't think they're going to trouble the semi-final spots. I love the ambition that's what they're going for, but I think to go from a team last year where there were some tighter games, but for the most part teams were pretty confident of getting 4 or 5 points when they played them. I think they're now going to be much more of a player in the rest of the league because they might not make the semi-finals themselves, but if you slip up against them, as I suspect teams will this year, they might be the reason you don't get in the semi-final. So I think Cobras are going to be a big surprise. I think the addition of these South Africans is something we've never seen in the league. 6 South Africans, including Roscoe Speckman, as we mentioned. So I think Cobras are going to upset a couple of teams.
Biggest disappointment?
I think only relative to where they've been. I think Dogos are going to struggle initially to replace the caliber of front 5 player. I mean, it's not just that front row I've mentioned. In the last 2 or 3 years, they've also seen Efrain Elias go to Toulouse and Franco Molina. I mean, it's a pretty impressive front 5 to lose over the course of a couple of years. And you can't replace those guys straight away. It will take time for the replacements to really, you mentioned they played last year, but to really step up to be those first choice. So, I think if I was a Dogos fan, maybe you'll look back at the last 3 years. Like I said, they made 3 finals in a row. They only won 1 of them. Maybe you'll look back and think we should have won 2 titles or maybe even 3 because, this season they're not quite where they were. But look, I look forward to seeing them prove me wrong.
I think Elias's brother's in the Dogos setup as well. He's coming through.
Another great thing about the league is there's brothers all over the place.
He's actually looks a half tidy player, so maybe he'll be following his brother across the continents in a couple of years' time. Apart from your Selknam prediction, one other bold prediction that might look crazy right now.
I think again, this isn't kind of strictly for the league, but I feel as though this might be the year that we finally see non-Argentine players begin to make that transfer over to Europe, because I think there has been, I don't know whether this is solely because, I don't know whether it's a visa thing, or I don't know whether it's because, when you sign an Argentine player, there's a kind of expectation that we know Argentina produces top players. But when I look at some of the Chileans, some of the Uruguayans that are, getting to the latter stages of these tournaments, winning these tournaments, and I look at, teams in Europe who might need a winger, need a fly half, need a back rower, I would be, my bold prediction is that this is a year that we start to see more of those tier 2 nations sending players abroad, guys getting signed up in France, and the Prem as well. I mean, there are a few, but they're very few and far between. Diego Escobar, the Racing hooker, is probably the highest profile Chilean currently playing outside of Chile, and he's done really, really well. I mean, he's alternates first or second choice for Racing at hooker, in a tough league to be a hooker, and he does a grand old job. And there are others here. When I spoke to him, it's one of the things that he was really keen to stress is that there are a lot of Chileans who are good enough to go and play in those leagues, and I wonder whether this is the year that the rest of the rugby kind of ecosphere, if there is such a word, begins to pick up on that and looks at it as a new opportunity to sign some fresh talent.
I hope so too. It does seem to be like there's only one recruiter that stays in Argentina. It doesn't seem to get past Chile, Uruguay, or anything, all of those sort of clubs. So hopefully, I agree. I'm fully on board with that prediction. For someone tuning into Super Rugby America's first time, which are the early games in the season that are the ones that you want to try and click and save as getting on the record button on your YouTube to watch the highlights at the minute, because it's not available in Europe, is it?
Yeah, so that's a good point. Worth pointing out that there is no current broadcaster outside of South America, but all of the games highlights are on YouTube. I also do a weekly roundup for the rugby paper. Maybe we'll talk about that before the end. So there are easier leagues to follow, I grant you, but I trust, believe me, you won't regret it if you do start following it. I think the 2 that stand out to me in the early weeks are Penarol Selknam, which I think is week 3. It's the oldest kind of fixture in the tournament's history. That ill-fated 2020 season kicked off with Penarol Selknam, and it's kind of affectionately referred to as the kind of the El Clasico of Super Rugby Americas. The Chileans and the Uruguayans, obviously the 2 leading tier 2 nations that participate. So that will be a really interesting one, because we'll know a lot more after that game of how much have Penarol dipped after those player absentees. And, are Selknam the real deal? Can you go and do a number on the defending champions? Selknam won't care who's on the Penarol roster as far as they're concerned. No. These guys are defending champions. They're the most successful team in the league's history. We want to go and put a marker down in week 3 and get one over them. So that one I think would be a key one. And the other one, the Dogos Pampas, or Pampas Dogos, it's in Buenos Aires, week 2, bad blood. plenty of rivalry. They were the finalists in 2024. Dogos knocked out Pampas in 2025. The rematch is on.
For those that obviously aren't aware as well, we've got Friday the 20th of February is the start of the season. Got Dogos against Cóndores and then Teros against Selknam. Saturday, obviously, we've got the other fixtures. We've got Yakare against Pampas, and then the Capybaras start their life in Super Rugby Americas at home to the reigning champions Penarol. That's a proper baptism of welcome to fire, isn't it? Like, here you go.
Yeah, doesn't
your first fixture.
Yeah, there's no stabilizers. They're being thrown at the deep end, right?
Imagine that though, if they get that opening day victory. Like, I'm sure there's going to be enough fans up for it, and that's probably if they can't get up for a game like that.
Well, yeah,
they ain't got much hope for the rest of the season.
I mean, but the first round of the first season I covered in South America's 2024 season, Cobras beat Penarol, who were also defending champions that day on week 1. So it can happen, and if Capybaras go and get the jump on Penarol that early, then they'll put the rest of the league on notice. I mean, like I said, you don't have that many people who've won the tournament, and they'll believe they can win the whole thing.
Because it basically runs from the end of Feb till the start of June on the normal season, doesn't it? And then we've got the semi-finals and then the final. Yeah. So by the 20th of June, we'll be all wrapped up roughly, and then most of these players will be probably jumping on planes going to international camp, like they did last season. Like, some of them literally got out of the final, out of the changing rooms, were on a plane to the summer tour, weren't they?
Yeah, no, I think maybe listeners don't quite realise the numbers that we're talking about here. I mean, the Argentina squad that faced the Lions, obviously there was, like it always is with the Lions, there's still club seasons ongoing in Europe, so they didn't have everybody available, but there was 13 Super Rugby Americas players in that squad. So it's a third of that squad that faced the Lions, the wider squad, not the matchday squad, were made up of Super Rugby Americas players. As I mentioned, I saw a load of them, in tears after losing to Penarol, and then I saw them in tears beating the Lions a couple of weeks later. I mean, it's a crazy thing. And when it comes to the other nations, we're talking, the whole 23 will be in the squad for, Penarol or Uruguay or Selknam, Chile, who will be going off to try and compete in this new Tier 2 competition. So no rest for the wicked, but I mean, more rugby for the rest of us.
Perfect. And obviously you can keep abreast of what they're doing all the way through the season and then catch them in the internationals. Joe, just want to say thank you so much for jumping on, mate. For those that want to find out more from yourself, obviously, rather than listen to me rabbit on about it, they can also find a man in the know that's in the place. Where can they find you? What work do you do, and where can they reach out and dabble and pick your brains if they want to try and find more about Super Rugby Americas?
The easiest place to find me is on X, Twitter, whatever we're calling it, whatever that site that is these days. So if you want to message me on there or follow me on there, my name is obviously the same as my name you can see on the screen, Joe Santamaria. Most of my Super Rugby Americas reporting is in the Rugby paper, so I do a weekly roundup. I've done a pre-season kind of preview of all the teams, and I'll do, like I said, a weekly roundup that normally goes out Monday or Tuesday after the fixtures. I also do work in Rugby Pass and a few other publications, but the best way to follow what I'm up to is on X if you're on there.
It took us a little while to get this one in the diary, mate, but it's been 100% worthwhile. Thank you so much for your time, mate. We know where we've got to watch out for. It's Selknam are going to win the Super Rugby Americas, basically.
I'll be interested to see if they thank me for that prediction or not.
For everyone else that's been watching us, I really appreciate your time. Hope you've enjoyed this one and found a new league to watch rugby at stupid o'clock in the morning if you're in Europe or anywhere else in the world. It's on a silly time if you manage to get a stream or you manage to watch the highlights, because it is well worth every moment of your life. And yeah, we've got plenty more coming up, not just Super Rugby Americas. We're approaching the Rugby Europe Championships. That's on the horizon. It's just a perfect time for rugby. And the Rugby TTL podcast is back. We are back on stream. We're back everywhere. Just make sure you subscribe, like and follow, and just really appreciate your time. Thank you and goodbye.